Okay, hello and welcome to those of you who've just joined us in the session. We were just allowing a few moments there for all of our attendees to join us, but I think in the interests of time, we'll kick off our training. So a big welcome and hello to everyone as we start our second part of the Gender Equality and Global Markets training program. So great to see so many of you rejoining us for today's training, and feel free to reintroduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like to say a quick hello. So as we're getting started, I'd just like to say a big thank you once again to our hosts at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, to Loshni, to Gabrielle and their team for helping us host today's training and bringing you all together as participants. This program is really a very collaborative effort, so our thanks go as well to our colleagues at the IFC, UN Women, the Columbia University, and with the support of the Luxembourg government as well for all of their collaboration on this program. And of course, a big thank you to all of you who've taken the time to join us in the training today. So as we're getting started, just a reminder that hopefully you did join us for the part one of the training program, as we'll be building off that part today. But if you didn't get part one, you can watch the recording of this program on the event webpage for today's session, and we'll share that link with you in the chat a number of times, so you can watch the recording there. And as a reminder, that's also where you can find all of the slide presentations from our training as well. So the slide handouts from today and last week's session, which include all of the links to the resources that we're going to be sharing with you in the chat as well. And you'll also find the slides from our guest speakers there as well. So just a quick recap on a few housekeeping points. So just to note that as participants, you are muted, but that really doesn't mean that we don't encourage and ask for your participation in the session. So feel free to share any general comments or introductions in the chat box. But if you have particular questions for the team, do make sure to put those into the Q&A box particularly, because that just makes it easier for us to ensure that we've spotted your question and we can track and answer that directly for you as well. Okay, and our format today is as the same as last session. So we'll have 2 hours together in our online workshop. We have that live opportunity to ask your questions throughout the training. So do really make the most of that chance to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer those as we move through the training. We'd love to see your participation in the interactive parts of our training today, the mentees and the polls. So do please take part in those. And finally, if you've completed the 2 parts of our training program with us in the session, you'll be able to receive a completion certificate at the end of our training today. So to get your certificate, you'll need to fill out the feedback survey, which we'll share with you at the end of today's training. So stay tuned for more information about that at the end of the session. Okay, so in terms of the training materials, just a quick reminder as well, as I've mentioned already, that you can find these on our webpage under the resources section of the page that Landon's shared the link to in the chat. And the recording from today's session will also be added there after the session has finished as well. And in terms of who's delivering the training for you today, it's great to be back with you, myself, Fiona, and Landon rejoining us from the UNSSE team as well. And we're very pleased as well to also be joined by Alexandra again from the UN Women's Empowerment Principles Global Secretariat team. So big thanks to Alexandra for joining us. And also today we've got 2 more guest speakers who'll be joining us at different points in the session to share their perspectives. So firstly, we'll have Guillaume Jacques joining us from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who'll be speaking to us about the work that his exchange have been doing on gender bonds. And then towards the end of the session, we'll have our second speaker, David Pritchett, the Managing Director of the EDGE Certified Foundation, joining us. So you might remember that we briefly touched on the EDGE certification approach in our last session, which is all around kind of a performance standard that you can implement internally to support your management of gender issues. So David's going to be here to tell us a bit more about that later on. Okay, and then just as a reminder, we've got those 4 modules that we're working through in our training, really designed to take you through those different steps that you'll need to take to improve gender equality performance in your own organizations. And so today we're going to be moving on to focus on those second 2 steps at the bottom of the circle there, so implement and communicate. And so this really builds off what we learned in the last session, so hopefully you were able to join us for that. And just an important note, I might have mentioned already, but just to remind you, of course, we've shown these steps in a nice circular sequence, but we know, of course, because this is an ongoing process within your organizations, you're likely to be working across all of these elements at different points in time. And this is really going to be a constant process of improvement. So for today's session in particular, we've got two key learning objectives linked to those two areas of our training. So firstly, on the implement side of things, we're going to be focusing on helping you to understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance. And so that could be through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender focused financial products. So we're going to be looking at that from both the financial institution perspective and also for corporates who might be looking to access financing as well. And then the second area we want to help with you today is to communicate gender-related information with internal stakeholders. So thinking about what's effective approaches to communication and how to identify the different guidelines that you can use to communicate that gender-related information with external stakeholders, so that you can really know what information investors are looking for in their corporate reporting. Okay, and then just to show you how that breaks down across our agenda today, again, we'll spend a roughly equal amount of time on our two modules, and we'll take a short break in the middle of the session. And then at the end, we'll wrap up and share some final resources that you can take away to support you as you continue on this topic. Okay, so to get us kicking off now, we're going to go back into Menti as we did last time and have a little bit of a test on how much you know about the topics we're covering today and a little bit of a quiz on one of the concepts that we talked about in our last session as well. So let me just share the Menti screen, and Landon has just provided the link in the chat as well. So thanks, Landon. So you can either click that link that Landon has shared, and that'll take you through to our question. You can also use that QR code that you'll see on my screen now. And finally, if you go to menti.com, you can enter that eight number code that you'll see at the top of the screen on the right-hand side as well. So just take a moment to find your way into Menti, and then the question for you once you get there is just to let us know how comfortable you would be currently with those different aspects. So either identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies, on communicating gender-related information to investors, and also on explaining to your colleagues the financial value of gender equality. So I see we've had 11 of you respond so far. Let's see, we have 70 people in the session. So I think we can do a little bit better than that. So I'll give you a moment. It'd be great to have as many of you joining us and taking part in the Menti questions as possible. So yeah, let's wait a few seconds and see if a few more of you can join us. Okay. So from those who've responded so far, it looks like predominantly we're finding ourselves somewhere in the middle on our understanding on all of these areas at the moment. So perhaps feeling, yeah, maybe like you've got a little bit of a baseline here, but you perhaps have a little bit more that you'd be interested to know. So I think that's a great position to be joining us in today. Okay, so we've got a few more responses in, so that's good. Thanks for those who've joined us in Menti. It gets fun in a second, so if you haven't joined us and want to, it's not too late because you get the added bonus of a nice little emoji. So once we've got a few of us in the room ready to play, I'll launch our quiz question. So a quick quiz question, really, just on one of the concepts that we talked about from last time, just to see if you can remember, and then we'll recap in the slides on the concept that we're testing. Okay, we'll give it a second for anyone else who wants to join. One more, and then let's get started. Okay, so you'll have your question pop up now, and you'll have a few seconds to answer the question after it goes live. So the question is, what's our overall objective here? Is it equity or equality? So obviously this is quite a tricky one because they're quite similar terms. And we talked about both of them last time, but see if you can remember which one is our overall objective here. So you've got another 12 seconds to have a little think, and then we'll see what the right answer is. Okay, last few responses in. Oh, very close, but those of you who got the right answer there, equality, were correct. So 13 of you overall, so not too bad. But indeed, equality is our overall objective. So let me go back to the slides and I'll remind you of the equation or sort of diagram we were using here to think about these concepts and how they fit together. So if you'll see there, that is that kind of overall diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of relationship that we talked through last time, and kind of how all of these aspects in the diagram are an important element of achieving equality. So if you remember, we talked about how each of these elements was key. So diversity is all around ensuring that we have multiple identities represented. So that could include sex, gender, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, and so on. So we would refer to diversity in this analogy as having those seats around the boardroom table. And then this is where equity comes in next. So equity was all around reorganizing and redistributing and recognizing power in the organization. So we may have at the moment power structures that just aren't enabling people to speak. So we could think about equity as being providing that microphone to those perhaps who are quiet or silent in the organization currently to ensure that that power distribution is more equitable to allow them to contribute. And then last but not least, we've got inclusion at the top of the diagram there. So this is all around ensuring that every individual feels welcomed and that they've got equal opportunities to connect, belong, and grow, and to contribute to the organization and feel comfortable and confident being themselves. So we could say that inclusion is like having the interpretation or headsets that will then allow everyone in the organization to understand each other and feel welcome. So that's how we kind of see those different aspects of DEI fitting together to overall contribute towards that goal of equality. So let's just recap a couple more key concepts from last time just to make sure we've remembered all of those before we kick off on the content. So firstly, let's just talk about some of the kind of key areas that set the groundwork here. So the business case and the human rights case. So we looked at how the world was doing so far in terms of gender equality, and we talked about a lot of the benefits that society and the economy could see from this. And so we also saw that as well as having those wider societal benefits, these really did translate into tangible business benefits as well. We then learned about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, and Alexandra shared with us how these principles can be used to help us get started on gender equality. And if you'll remember as well, we also looked a little bit about how important corporate culture and the approach individual organizations take is to achieving progress. So if you remember, we talked through that case study of Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC and showed how important culture was. So this slide just flagged a few of the key elements of culture that organizations will need to think about really to contribute towards a holistic approach on this topic. Okay, so that just gives us a little bit of a recap on our first two modules, Prepare and Align. And now we're going to transition into getting started on our third unit, which is all around gender lens finance and the market mechanisms that can support those principles that we talked about together last week. So I'll hand over to Landon to get us started on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Fiona, for getting us started. And great again to see everyone here today. So, as Fiona said, we're going to start looking more at implementation of gender equality, and we'll talk a bit more about products that support market action, and we'll also look at some of the mechanisms that add value and can promote gender equality in markets. So first, let's look at how financial products are being used to advance gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. To get started, I want to take a moment to look at some of the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So here we see the growth in sustainable funds. This is from the 2025 World Investment Report produced by one of our parent organizations, UNCTAD, and it's showing the market value of sustainable funds, and it's now at about 3.2 trillion. and we see more than 7,500 funds, which is up slightly from 2023. We do see, as some of you might notice, a bit of a decrease around 2024 in global net investment flows to sustainable funds. But it's important to note the context of that year, which was decreased asset values, concerns about global recessions and recessions in certain markets. Some other factors like high inflation, not sure I mentioned rising interest rates, and other such factors. And as such, sustainability-themed funds still remain an important tool to direct capital towards sustainable development, despite that small dip. We're also seeing significant growth in gender lens investing. However, to be frank, the data on gender lens investing is much more difficult to capture and measure, so we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider these factors. Last year, we did at the SSE produce a report on gender-themed products that we'll come back to later today, and that gave a bit of an overview on the gender lens investing side of things. We don't have enough time today to dive totally into this topic, but we have provided you with some extra slides in your handout on this. So if this is something you're keen to look into more, I recommend you check out the slides after today's session. Now, I mentioned a term a couple of times, gender lens investing already. So naturally, you might be asking yourself, what is gender lens investing? So let's just take one moment to discuss that. If you could share in the chat, what do you think gender lens investing is? So obviously, if you're joining today's session, you might already know what gender lens investing is. That's great. If you do, please put your definition in the chat. And if you're joining today's session because you don't know much about gender investing, uh, feel free to put in the chat what you think it is. There's no grading on this, so we're just happy to see some participation here. So what do you think is gender lens investing? You can put in your working definition or even just a few words that you think resonate with you when you hear that. Yumiko notes incorporating gender aspects from different stakeholders' perspectives into your investments. Okay. Dr. Sudesh notes that they're not familiar. Well, that's okay because we're hoping with today's session you'll learn more. Uh, Carmen notes investing with the clear intention of closing gender equality gaps, ideally with a dedicated budget and measurable outcomes. I love that you included measurable outcomes there. Investment approach that incorporates gender equality advancement. That's from Metabe. Great. Any last definitions? Any last thoughts? A couple more investing. Oh, sorry, the chat's moving quick. Investing with ensuring there's benefit for women and girls. Investments with a distinct focus on gender sensitive or empowerment outcomes. Integrating gender equality. Absolutely. Gender responsive investment decisions. Okay, great. And then women-led business. Okay, lots more coming in. So thanks so much for your participation there. So there was already a lot of great answers. Now we're going to look at an official definition. I will note that there are some differences in definitions, but we think this definition is a pretty good foundation to build on. So this is from the Global Impact Investing Network, and they define gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and/or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So, as the name gender lens investing makes clear, gender is a lens, so a way of seeing that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. And I think this working definition builds on a lot of what was already shared in the chat. So it's great to see a lot of you already have a pretty good grasp on this. So you might ask, how are investors using that gender lens to make investment decisions? Well, there's many different strategies. So some of the core strategies we see look specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes. but often we see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies used to varying degrees. The most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership. So perhaps an investment portfolio is looking at the CEO or the CFO or the board. But we also see other areas, other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on might be the employees. What is perhaps the pay equity gap between employees or supply chains, perhaps products and services, and also the community impact. At the firm level, fund managers can also drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting within their own investment house. So we see fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own team, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments to gender diversity. The IFC has developed a framework that we link to in this slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. Now, that was a bit more at the fund level and at the portfolio level. Fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. These strategies enable the fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these five key areas you see on your screen. So here we see women represented in leadership. We see gender diverse and equitable workforce, a gender inclusive value chain, offering and designing products or services that consider the unique and distinct needs of women and girls as a consumer segment, and ensuring their operations do no harm to women in the surrounding community. The good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has also increased considerably over recent years. This has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across different asset classes. I want to give a brief overview of this investment universe. So let's take a look here at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and advancing gender equality. On the left-hand side here, we see that there's a few buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. This includes equity-based financial products, debt or fixed income financial products, and then also funds, which can be either debt or equity-based. And on the right-hand side, we see that investors accessing these financial products also vary. So we're seeing both retail or individual investors, as well as institutional investors, for example, making use of these different financing vehicles. This is important to note because different investors have different needs, different targets and expectations, and this can lead to a diversity of products as well to meet those different needs. Before we jump into some case studies, I want to take a moment to quickly share about the publication I mentioned before on gender-themed financial products. This report provided a global inventory and analysis of nearly 300 gender-themed financial products and instruments, including bonds, equity funds, and indices across both developing emerging markets as well as developed markets. I'll share a couple key insights. So we see gender-themed products, they remain a niche, but that isn't to say that they're not important and growing segment of the global financial market, with index and market benchmark-based tools comprising a substantial share. I'll note here that when we say market benchmark-based tools, some people also call those knowledge products. So those aren't investable products, just to note that. And then we also see an insight here on government-issued gender bonds, which are particularly prominent in emerging markets as compared to developed markets. We also found that gender-themed equity funds held relatively low asset values. And then we also mapped all these different products to the WEPs, the Women's Empowerment Principles, and we found that there was inconsistent alignment of the products with the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. And then something I touched on when we were talking about the definition a moment ago, we also found that there's an absence of standardized definitions, reporting frameworks, and taxonomies, and then this can contribute to concerns about quote unquote gender washing. You've probably heard of greenwashing. So some people say there's gender washing, or sometimes people say pink washing, where gender labels may be used without demonstrating real impact. In sum, the report urges greater integration of gender equality into sustainable finance taxonomies, stronger verification mechanisms to ensure that there's the impact that, say, a fund is claiming to have actually takes place. And we're also looking for alignment with the WEPs and Sustainable Development Goal 5, SDG 5, to ensure that gender-themed investments actually are delivering the meaningful outcomes that they might claim they are. Now, I want to take a moment to look at a few real-world case studies that can help us better understand some of the examples I just mentioned of different gender products. Building on Monday's discussion, or actually last week's, the Longo Safe Water Project in Uganda is a perfect example of how climate and gender benefits work in tandem. So in 2020, this project became the first ever project to receive the gold standard gender responsive certification. The project is on rehabilitating boreholes, and they provide clean water to 40,000 people. And this also cuts or reduces 50,000 tons of CO2 emission annually. Now, that's obviously important on climate, but then the social impact is where the project, I think, really stands out. So we see households saving 4 hours a week on water collection. That is time gained back almost exclusively by women and girls. We also see the Water Resource Committee has reached near parity. And most strikingly, reported domestic violence related to water collection has dropped from about 35% down to zero reported. And we also see almost every woman surveyed is now using that save time for income generating activities. So there's also a bit more economic empowerment there. It's important to note and understand that while Gold Standard requires all projects to be gender sensitive, this project went an additional step further to become gender responsive. This means that they move beyond just doing no harm to actively setting targets that actively reduce inequality. So for anyone looking to buy credits, this project offers a high integrity carbon reductions that are also rigorously verified for social impact. The next case study I want to discuss is the dual benefit bond on Gender Smart. The next example is of the integration of dual benefits or co-benefits of financial products such as bonds. So this is the world's first ever gender equality loan, where a Turkish company, Polat Energy, received a $44 million loan in 2019 to finance the construction of Turkey's largest wind farm at the time. However, rather than just issuing a green bond, the company integrated gender equality metrics, and then its performance is annually assessed based on a series of gender criteria. And it was also agreed that improvements will enhance the terms of the loan. So obviously, there's an incentive there as well. So different criteria include actions such as a return to work programs for employees returning from maternity leave, ensuring gender equality in new hires, prioritization of woman-owned enterprises in the supply chain, measures to avoid gender pay gaps, policies to prevent harassment, and trainings to overcome unconscious negative bias against women. And then the score, which will be calculated according to the methodology developed by Guarantee BBVA, reveals the gender equality performance of Polat Energy across its entire value chain. And Guarantee BBVA is also ready to support Polat Energy with its own HR department in setting relevant policies and procedures if there's any need. So in addition to rewarding Polat Energy for improving its gender equality, the gender loan also seeks to encourage other sustainable infrastructure companies to adopt gender inclusive practices and serve as an example to other financial institutions. We're also seeing similar metrics and financing considerations being integrated into carbon credits, such as the W plus standard, which allows for the accreditation of carbon projects and the credits that are issued to be certified with quantifiable contributions to women's empowerment. Now, there's one more example on bonds, which you can review in your handout. This example comes from the IFC and their Banking on Women program. I definitely recommend checking this out on the IFC's Banking on Women website, as they have a number of great examples and resources. I saw my colleague Fiona just shared that in the chat. But in the interest of time, we'll continue along and let's dive a bit deeper into what exactly it means to list or invest in gender bonds.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Landon. So, yeah, as we said, we're going to dive into have a little bit more of a look at gender bonds now and what we mean by this. So let's start with what we mean exactly by gender bonds. And so to get us started, I'm going to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sits, and then I'll pass over to Guillaume from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to give us some more detail on this in a moment. But let's just cover a few of the basics. So firstly, starting with the real basics, if anyone isn't familiar with the term bonds, so bonds are fixed income investment products which are issued by governments or corporations to enable them to raise funding. So at the end of a sort of predetermined period, the bond issuer, so that's the company or the government entity, will repay the investors in the bond with interest, which is in addition to the original face value of the bond. And then sustainability bonds are bonds that are designed to finance or refinance environmental or social projects. And within that, we have a few different types of bond that have emerged. So green bonds are probably the one that most heard of at the moment, and perhaps to be the term you've heard of already. So these are a subset of bonds within that overall green, social, and sustainability bond universe. And then when we see gender bonds, often at the moment, gender bonds are not necessarily a category of bonds in themselves like we might see for green bonds. But increasingly, we are starting to see bonds that have a gender focus. And that could either be by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linking the bond to a project that supports or enhances gender equality. And what we want to highlight here as well is that we are seeing quite a distinct overlapping with green bonds for climate and gender co-benefit. We heard about that in that case study that Landon just shared with us from the gold standard. So, what are the trends in terms of social bonds? So, if we look at the debt markets, we can see here that overall, if we're looking over around a 5-year time frame or so, we have seen quite a lot of growth in sustainable finance bonds. This data is taken from that World Investment Report that we shared with you already. And it shows that the cumulative global issuance for sustainability bonds reached a record level of over 1 trillion US dollars in 2024. Although, as you can see, we have seen some declines since 2020. This trend was found to be in line with the broader bond market. So overall, we do still think that there's a clear signal that social and mixed sustainability bonds are on a longer term growth trajectory. And we can see that since 2019, for example, we've seen a 19% increase in issuance. So, as I've said, we might be familiar with green bonds, but it's important to notice that specifically since 2020, we've also seen a growth in those social bonds and mixed sustainability bonds, which include those with gender-related objectives. So you can see in that breakout on the right-hand side of the screen that social bonds are now accounting for over a third of the sustainability bond market. So still a little bit smaller than green bond, but on a growth trajectory as an overall share of the sustainable bond market. So how do we define what a gender bond is and how do we know, what is a good project here? So there's a number of different guidelines that can be used to help us determine this. And so importantly, these guidelines can be used from either perspective. So either if you're an issuer of a bond looking to raise that funding, or if you're an investor who's looking to invest in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. And so these two examples on the screen are guidance that can be used to help assess or develop criteria for a bond. And so we have the social bond principles from ICMA, which provide guidelines for issuing social bonds. And then we also have the climate bonds initiatives methodology, which is around determining whether you could include a bond in their social and sustainability bond database. And so, what is probably important to highlight about this guidance is that it's all around helping to build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes. So, although it's admirable to set out a big objective and call something a gender bond, of course, if we don't really put in place the right measures and understand whether we're achieving the impact that we want through that investment, then of course, we're missing a big part of the equation here. And so that's where I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker on this topic, Guillaume Jacques, who is a sustainable finance analyst at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So, Lux SE have been a very active exchange on this particular topic. So, it'd be great to hear from you, Guillaume, to share a little bit more about the work your team have been doing.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you for having me today. So, yes, indeed, I will present what gender-focused bonds are and give you some case studies. And first of all, let me share my screen in order to do that. Here we are. So yes, I work as a sustainable finance analyst in the Green Exchange team. I've been working in the Luxembourg Stock Exchange for a few years now, also working the listing teams before, and I will present today what are gender-focused bonds. So it all started and actually started to gain traction with this document, which is Bonds to Bridge the Gender Gap. And it is a practitioner's guide to using sustainable debt for gender equality, which was released in 2021 by the ICMA, UN Women, and IFC. And there are objectives both on the issuer side and also on the investor side. On the issuer side, so the goal is to support new and existing bond issuers, but also all the stakeholders which are involved in bond issuances, in order to take action to integrate gender equality objectives into sustainable investments. Regarding now the investor side, the goal of this document is to help investors to understand, but also to support projects and strategies which are linked to gender equality and gender overall. And basically and more globally, it really serves as a practical guide and gives examples both for use of proceeds bonds, so kinds of use of proceeds which can be financed by gender-focused bonds, but also KPIs and SPTs, so key performance indicators and sustainability performance targets in the case of sustainability-linked bonds. But we will see that just in the next few slides. So as I mentioned, and as it was mentioned also before, there are two types of gender-focused bonds. The first ones being use of proceeds bonds and the second ones being sustainability-linked bonds. We will start with the gender-focused bonds, the use of proceeds bonds. So the goal, as the name tells it, is to use the proceeds towards gender equality. And in our case, at the stock exchange, we identify them based on the Sustainable Development Goal number 5. So we have two ways to identify the gender-focused bonds, either in pre-issuance or in post-issuance. So how does it work for the pre-issuance? In that case, so all the documents linked to the bond must precise that 100% of the proceeds will be linked to gender equality objectives, so SDG 5. If we have the certitude that 100% of the proceeds will be used towards that goal, then the gender-focused bond can already be labeled as such in pre-issuance. The second case is when we have use of proceeds bonds, which finance a lot of different projects. Let's say renewable energy, education, clean transportation, and also one category which is linked to gender. In that case, we will have to wait. It is usually 1 year after the issuance for the post-issuance report to be published. In this report, we will see the allocation of the proceeds, and we will make sure that a significant portion of the proceeds were used towards SDG 5. Then the bond can be labeled as gender focused, and it will be then in post issuance. So this is for the use of proceeds bonds. And now, just maybe one more thing about the use of proceeds bonds. They can be either social, sustainability, or in some cases, green, as it was also mentioned by Fiona earlier. Now, regarding sustainability-linked bonds, maybe to re-explain a bit what sustainability-linked bonds are. So they are bonds for which the financial characteristics of it are linked to some targets. So at least the KPI and the target. So as you can see on the bottom left, at the issue date, there is at least one KPI and one SPT, which is linked to the KPI, which is set. So let's say, for example, in the case of gender, reaching 30% of women in the board of directors. That could be one objective by 2030, let's say. Then in 2030, if the SPT is met, there can be some implication on the financial characteristics. The example here says if the SPT is met, there can be a coupon step down. So, for example, a decrease in the interest paid to investors. And if the SPT is not met, there can be a coupon step up, so an increase in the interest paid to investors. But this is just one example. There can be a lot of penalty mechanisms, as they are called, if the SPT is not met. So, for example, there could be a donation to an NGO, there could be an increase in the redemption price, there can be a premium payment at another time. So there are lots of different mechanisms which can be used for SLBs. And in the case of gender-focused SLBs, the only criteria that we have also at the exchange is to have at least one KPI and thus one SPT which targets SDG 5. So which targets gender equality or women empowerment overall. So this is for SLBs. And I will now switch to a case study. So this is a social bond from a commercial bank in Tanzania, NMB Bank, on financing women-owned businesses. And I have a small video to show you for this case study. Let's go.
Guillaume, I don't think we have the sound at the moment.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'll just have to check for the settings.
Sometimes it's easier if you unshare and reshare your screen, you can select to share sound
Okay.
when you're sharing it.
Yes, I will. Indeed. Forgot once again to
No problem.
take one slide. Okay, I'll restart from the beginning then.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and governments. I'm the treasurer for the bank, so main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds, so liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female.
Sorry to interrupt, Guillaume. I don't know if we could just check on the bottom left, you see where the play button is. We just check it is up full. Yeah, that's strange. I don't know if maybe you could put the subtitles on the bottom right. That might help if anyone's having trouble with the sound.
Yes, no problem.
Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully that will help.
Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we need to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSEs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it will be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles, and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there's a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of efforts, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us perhaps also to consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding. Be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or development financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Thank you for your attention during the video. I hope this is useful, and I think it's really interesting to see the issuer side of bond issuance. So now I will continue with the presentation. Just to talk a bit more about this case study, this bond issuance. So it was issued in 2022 and also listed on LGX in 2023, March 2023. And so, as it was mentioned, the proceeds are used for loans to women MSMEs in Tanzania. And over 2,000 women MSMEs would be helped with this bond. So this is really useful, and especially in this region, as it is really hard for women to have access to finance. Indeed, 75% of women in Tanzania struggle to obtain access to finance. So this is really a relevant bond, which has a lot of impact. And as you can see in the investors' reaction, it is really welcomed by investors as the program was oversubscribed by 197%. So we can see that there is a lot of traction for these bonds, and these are really, really useful. Now, regarding a case study for gender-focused SLBs. So this is a bond example from EQT Group, which is a global investment firm. Which is with the headquarters located in Sweden. And they had some multiple KPIs and targets with their bond, and two of them were linked to SDG 5, linked to women and gender equality. So as we can see on the left, the first one was women investment advisory professionals. So to increase the women from these professionals to 28% by 2026. And the second KPI is women independent board members appointed at certain EQT portfolio companies. So to have this share to increase to 36% by 2026, and it was 21% in 2020. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in this case, if the SPTs are not met, there will be a penalty mechanism. And in this case, it is a coupon step up. So the interest paid to investors would be increased if these targets are not met. Maybe as a reminder, in that case also, for SLBs, the proceeds can be used for whatever reasons the company needs them. So for general corporate purposes or for any other reasons. There was also, in this case of the SLB, there was also order books which were in excess of euro 1.7 billion. So there was also a very strong demand from investors. And I think this is all for me. I would be very pleased to receive some of your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Guillaume. Really helpful. So I'll just give it a second. If anyone does have a question that they might like to ask, we have a little minute or so that we could do so. But I'm not seeing any at the moment. So give it a couple of seconds. But otherwise, I think that was a really helpful presentation. And as a reminder to everyone, you can access those materials from the event page for the session as well. So a big thank you, Guillaume, for joining us. I really appreciate your contribution to the training.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you need more information also on the gender focused bonds, we released a study in September 2025, which can be really useful to see also the market trends and a bit more details on these kinds of bonds. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. If you have a link to that you could share in the chat, I'm sure the participants will find that helpful.
I will do. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. So that brings us close to the end of our segment here now. So I've just got a few more things I'm going to cover before we take our break. So we've talked there on the sort of product side of investment as to what that could look like in terms of the bonds example. But let's take a little bit of a look now and wrap up this unit and looking at how we see gender equality themed financial products being promoted in the market more generally. And so at the SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance that we developed a few years ago for exchanges on this topic. And we found that there were two main ways that markets were promoting gender equality. So firstly, through the promotion of participation, and secondly, through the promotion of impact. So let's go through each of those two areas briefly. So if we start by promoting participation, what do we mean there? Well, we're talking about both the supply side and the buy side, and the action we're seeing to apply a gender lens in global markets to help access unserved segments. So, on the sell side, so that's the firms that would create, promote, or sell financial products, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. So, for example, a project that we could highlight here is the Sourcing to Equal initiative, which is led by the IFC in partnership with the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and the Government of Norway. And Sourcing to Equal aims to connect women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. And then on the buy side, so that's the institutions that manage the money and buy securities to generate returns for themselves or investors, we see the investment in and support of women-led traders. And this relates back to what we were discussing earlier, in that different gender lens investment strategies are being used not just at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firms themselves. And of course, this is because it's been well documented that all male investment teams indeed are likely to invest in fewer women-led businesses than those that have a more equitable gender balance. And one example of this type of promotion on the buy side is an annual women-focused investment summit that indeed the Johannesburg Stock Exchange run, called JSE She Invests. So in addition to providing a networking opportunity, the event covers a variety of topics, including finance and investment literacy, and also showcases different ways in which women can invest in the market. So if you're interested, the next JSE She Invests conference will take place in August, and you can find out more about that on the JSE website. And so, as well as promoting gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets can promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. And here we're seeing markets raising awareness of financial products and promoting listing of products through awards or incentives, with the objective of really shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. And we can also see some markets that are creating particular segments or indices that are aiming to make it easier to find and identify and invest in those high impact stocks or financial products which are prioritizing those social outcomes. And so an example of two such indices is shown on the screen here from Euronext and from Bloomberg. And so I think what's important to note here is that indices can vary from each other. So as you can see in this comparison, there's some differences here between what these particular indices are tracking. And as of course we heard in the first part of our training last week, in order to really capture that holistic picture, which we know is important to really understand these issues, we do need to look at this topic from a number of different perspectives. And so, for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would, of course, only let us know one aspect of the company's performance regarding gender equality. And of course, sometimes that might be the element that we want to track. But of course, if we're investing with the objective of driving capital towards companies that are really contributing to gender equality related goals in society and their companies, and because of course we understand the value of gender equality as well for companies, then of course we'll want a broader range of data to support us with that assessment. But this is where we can see that although the detail of the metrics can differ between indices, the categories of information they're looking at are broadly quite similar. So it can be helpful as a company to benchmark your disclosure practices against those metrics included in key industries for your market or industry. And that will help to then ensure you're providing disclosures that are aligned with those kind of data points that investors are looking at, and hopefully as well support your inclusion in such indices. Okay, so just to wrap up this section, we'll just have a quick poll question just to kind of wrap up and reflect on this. So let's launch that poll. So Why do you think it is overall that investors are looking for gender-related investment opportunities? So we've got a number of different possibilities here for reasons why investors might be considering this. You can select as many of those as you would think are relevant from your perspective, and we'll take a look at the results and see what you think in a few moments. But I'll give you maybe another 20 seconds or so just to let us know what you think. We like to get as many of you taking part in the polls as possible. So I can see we're up to 28% of you taking part. It'd definitely be nice to get over the 50% mark. So let's give that a little bit longer. Don't worry about getting the answers wrong here. That's all part of the learning process, of course, as well. So feel free just to have a guess if you're not sure. Okay, give it a few more seconds. We're nearly at the 50% mark. Maybe one or two more responses. Okay, there we go. So let's share the results. So a little bit of a spread, but it looks like certainly a lot of you selected diversifying their portfolios or managing gender-related risks. Absolutely, both very valid reasons why investors may be considering this. And then quite a few of you also selected as well those top three answers. But most of you indeed got this correct, that the only thing that we would say is incorrect here is that fourth option around preventing men from accessing leadership positions. Of course, as we've talked about, in the long run, we think that investors who are considering these risks and opportunities are ultimately going to generate better returns and start to serve segments of the market as well that perhaps have been untapped previously. We also showed in some of those case studies as well that actually there's a lot of interconnectivity and co-benefit between gender-related impacts and climate-related risk and opportunity management as well. But indeed, of course, the aim here is not to exclude men as such, because, of course, gender lens investing is not really meant for this. And if this is the outcome and we're seeing that happening, then, of course, we might be going about this in the wrong way, as we heard about in some of our case studies from last session as well. Okay, thanks everyone for taking part. So that brings us up to the end of our first module, and we're now going to take a quick break. So same approach as we did in our last training. We'll play you a 5-minute video with some music, and then we'll reconvene the session when we reach the end of the timer. So feel free to take a quick break away from your desks, but if you do have any questions for us based on what you've heard so far in the training, feel free to take a moment to put those into the Q&A, and otherwise we'll see you in 5 minutes' time. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll get started here on the next section about being transparent on gender equality progress. So if you give me 1 second, my tech is acting up a little bit. Okay, there we go. So yeah, welcome back. Hope you had a chance to stretch a bit or grab a cup of coffee. And now that we've had time to look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality, let's have a look at how an organization can communicate on their performance on advancing gender equality, which can be one means of accessing these gender-specific financing mechanisms. However, this is not only important for communicating with investors about your impact, but also internal communication is key to ensure that the culture change we've talked so much about in today's session and the last session, which is a necessary aspect of performance, that this culture change actually takes place. So our final unit of the training has two main sections. We'll talk both about communication and transparency within an organization, internally among its employees, as well as with external communication, or excuse me, external communication with stakeholders. To start, let's look at how you can manage communication with suppliers, so external. And there's many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization. And what we want to highlight today is the concept of gender responsive procurement as a tool for advancing gender equality, not just in your own organization, but in your wider marketplace as well. And to guide us on this, we're very fortunate to have with us an expert and our colleague at UN Women, Alexandra, who will discuss the tools provided by the WEPS team on supporting this topic. So I'll turn it over to you now, Alexandra. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Landon, and good morning, everyone. Great seeing all of you again today. So, as said, we'll be looking at gender responsive procurement and engaging with suppliers in this section. And often when people hear the word supplier engagement, they might associate it with compliance and requirements, but we want to take a different angle today. So really focusing on the engagement part and the communication part with suppliers. So supplier engagement on gender equality is critical because it recognizes that a company's impact extends far beyond its immediate operations and into the value chains. So by promoting gender equality among suppliers as well, your business strengthens supplier performance, ensures their compliance with the law, but also builds more resilient and inclusive value chains for your business and for the sector at large. Supplier engagement is also about partnerships, support, and mutual benefit. So companies and especially WEP signatories can set the tone by clearly communicating expectations to their suppliers, assessing where suppliers stand, and then also providing practical tools and incentives and support to help them improve. So I think we heard that from our previous, from the previous interventions as well, where we know that there are larger companies with more extensive supply chain management systems, and then there might be middle-sized companies that are systematically excluded. A lot of them might be women-led companies. So really taking on that responsibility and that role and that opportunity to support a diverse set of companies within the supply chain. So when we're talking about gender responsive procurement, at the Women's Empowerment Principles, we mean fostering a gender responsive ecosystem. So really that collaboration working together. We encourage and guide WEP signatories to systematically source their goods and services from other enterprises that align with the Women's Empowerment Principles or that also have strong gender equality objectives in their business strategy. Because when WEP signatories, but companies in general, purchase from other companies that also have strong gender equality objectives, companies can, on the one hand, multiply the impact on gender equality, but also enhance their supply diversity. So we've got research that demonstrates that it also improves the supply chain performance and diversity of the company itself, as well as reducing procurement costs. And it also reduces systemic discrimination. So pursuing gender responsive procurement can really enhance the supplier's opportunity to grow and gain exposure to business networks, and high-value market opportunities. I'm just seeing that there might be an issue with the audio from the chat.
No, we can. Okay, Alexandra.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it must be just for that person, but yeah, carry on.
Okay, great. I just wanted to check in. So if I could ask you to go to the next slide, please. Sorry, I believe I don't have the controls to move.
Yes, sorry, I just
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I've just given you control. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, so what is the gender responsive procurement, and how does the Women's Empowerment Principles framework and tools support you in it? So the first step that we propose for companies to do is to do an assessment to understand where your company stands when it comes to gender responsive procurement. So we've developed a gender responsive procurement assessment tool, or GRP assessment. And this is a self-assessment tool which is available for web signatories to assess progress on their policies and practices. So the tool comprises 31 questions covering 5 main themes, and this helps us also understand a bit what we're talking about when we're talking about gender responsive procurement. So on the one hand, gender equality commitments of your own company, procurement policy and strategy, and to what extent gender equality is integrated into it. Internal procurement and supply chain management departments and diversity within that department, as well as supplier databases and data reporting. So what do you know about your suppliers and what do you collect about them, as well as supplier engagement and diversification. So what strategies do you have to diversify your supplier base and engage with a larger network of companies. Based on the data you provide, you will receive a scorecard that highlights gaps and areas for improvement, but also already areas for strength in your procurement. And it then classifies and lets you know whether you are sort of at the beginning stage of integrating gender responsive procurement into your business model, or already have advanced to improver or even leader stage. It's important to note that the data that you enter in the self-assessment tool is confidential and the results will never be linked back to individual companies. So it's really something that is meant for companies to help you and to have those internal dialogues with your team, but then also be able to have those external dialogues with your stakeholders, with your suppliers and your partners. So just like developing a gender action plan, to develop a gender responsive procurement practice and policies, consultations and communication is a core part of it. So it's really important to listen to your internal stakeholders, to the experts in your companies, to the ones that are maintaining those relationships with your suppliers, but also to ask questions of your suppliers and engage in a dialogue with them. We know that this can sometimes at the beginning it can be difficult to open that conversation, but really having an open and honest and ongoing conversation with suppliers is what will foster a systemic change in the business ecosystem and in your sector towards gender equality. So the first step is, of course, securing company-wide commitment and support by communicating internally on your results. So what is your current gender responsive procurement maturity level, as well as what are your goals? And again, here we very much advocate for having specific numbers, targets, and being as specific as possible, and defining the timeframes. Ensuring diverse teams and building their capacity so that your procurement team is on board with gender equality and understands what it means, but also that you have both women and men buyers that may understand and are able to relate to and link to diverse suppliers as well. Setting clear targets and tracking results that will create a clear action plan and you're able to see your performance progress. Mapping suppliers is where a lot of the external communication comes in. So learning more about them, learning more about their practices, Do they maybe have a gender equality policy? Are they a web signatory? Are they owned by women or men or jointly owned, etc. And then, of course, engaging with the current and future suppliers to share your company's stance on gender equality, help them understand the importance of them being part of this movement to you and for continued support, but also finding ways how you can grow and develop together. So some key recommendations and actions for to advance gender responsive procurement. So this information is all from a research that we have done with the watch and jewelry companies in 2023 when we were working on testing the gender responsive procurement assessment tool. And also from feedback from our WEPS community and signatories, where we've got over 12,000 companies that have joined the WEPS. So we saw that the marketplace initiatives was one of the fastest growing areas of interest for companies. So they really want to understand how can they impact the marketplace. As we said in the first session, a lot of the focus previously has been on the workplace, so internal actions, but now it's really how can we influence the marketplace? How can companies also communicate towards their partners the importance of gender equality and also drive systemic change? So key gaps that existed from that research were really having the data on suppliers. And this isn't a very widely practiced activity, so it's already a key step to have that procurement and supplier database, including sex disaggregated data or gender-related information. Gender responsive procurement wasn't integrated into the core business strategy. So it was seen as something that if companies did do it, it was sort of an add-on, but not part of value creation for the business. And then, of course, the lack of key performance indicators to track progress. So based on those challenges, these 5 recommendations have been developed to help companies who are sort of starting on that journey. So recommendation number 1 is always starting with outlining your commitments. So it's really about thinking about the policies and the strategies and the action plan, and writing it down, and so that you have a clear target and clarity about what you're going to do, but also are able to track progress. That's related to the second recommendation: monitor your progress, monitor your processes, and keep the conversation going internally as well as externally. Empower employees through training. Gender responsive procurement is by some considered as a niche expertise area, but the fusion of the procurement expertise, value chain expertise, and gender expertise is what's going to drive your company forward. Collect sex disaggregated data and report regularly on the progress made. So you can either report through the WEPS portal or include it in your company-wide annual reporting. And then, of course, start engaging suppliers. And we always say it's better to start small than to wait to have a whole system in place before you start. This engagement can start already with core trusted partners. So I hope that today's session has inspired you to go back to your companies to take a step towards advancing gender equality through gender responsive procurement as well, and see how you can influence and work with the marketplace, both to grow your own company, but also to advance gender equality in your sector and your society. So thank you very much, and I will hand it over to Fiona, I believe. Back to you. If there
Great.
are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the Q&A as well, or stay online for a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that overview, Alexandra. And yeah, as you say, we have an expert here with us, so please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A function, and we'll do our best, as well as Alexandra, to answer them. So that was a really helpful overview on gender responsive procurement and some useful actions that you can take. With that, now that we've covered engaging suppliers through gender responsive procurement, we'll move on to communicating more widely to other external stakeholders. To kick this off, we're going to launch a Zoom poll here. Oh, apologies. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. The Zoom poll didn't want to show for me. So we're looking to see how your organization or organizations are currently disclosing on gender-related information. So if you could answer, does your company disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? So it could be a CSR, ESG, or sustainability report, your annual financial report, a gender pay equity gap report, or perhaps your organization uses all of the above, perhaps none of the above, or maybe you're currently not sure. So as you're filling this in, feel free to let us know in the chat. What do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? Should it be a CSR, an annual financial report? And what factors are you looking for to decide if, for example, information should appear in the annual financial reporting package, perhaps using the ISSB's IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, or instead in a sustainability report, perhaps using the GRI standards? So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, well, we'll end the poll there. And I'll share the results. And here we can see that the majority of you noted that you're currently disclosing gender-related information through a CSR, ESG, or sustainability report. And then a fair amount of you, your organizations as well, are using annual financial reports. There's some organizations represented here using gender pay gap reports. Some are using all of the above. Almost the same amount are using none of the above, and a few of you are not sure. If you're not sure, I definitely recommend checking out with a lead or whoever may be responsible and seeing how you can start reporting. Now, with that, we want to cover who you communicate to, and who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you will use. So, to report to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The ISSB has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards. And then for reporting to other stakeholders, you might want to use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally. And then together, these can form a holistic reporting package to a very broad range of stakeholders. In terms of where to disclose different information on gender equality, and in terms of the content for each type of audience, for investors, you might focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this would go into your annual report alongside your financial statements and other disclosures. And then to communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you'd report more about the impact of your business on the environment, society, and economy at large, as this will be more in line with what they want to know. At the same time, this information will also be useful to some of your investors, and it will support the information you reported in your annual financial report. To report to investors in this annual financial report, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requires your organization to disclose four broad areas, which you may already recognize if you're familiar with the earlier recommendations of the TCFD or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So the ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. Well, the ISSB doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality. They do highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Looking at multi-stakeholder reporting, we went through GRI standards and identified those that most directly address gender equality, hopefully to help you understand where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your own sustainability reports. Here we found gender-related disclosures are part of disclosures on employees, governance structure and composition, policy commitments, and approach to stakeholder engagement. And on the screen, you can also see the references to the particular sections of the GRI2 standard on the slide here, where you'll be able to find further information on those disclosures. And as you may know, GRI transitioned to a modular structure with Universal Standards 2021 and topic standards like GRI 405 on diversity and equal opportunity and GRI 406 on non-discrimination remain central to reporting on these specific topics. Organizations are now required to report their management approach on both of these topics following the requirements in GRI 3, Material Topics 2021, and this ensures a consistent format for describing how an entity identifies and manages its impacts. As well, under GRI 202-1, organizations must disclose the ratios of standard entry-level wages by gender compared to the local minimum wage, providing a quantitative look at gender pay equity at the start of an employment cycle. So I know that's a lot of standards talk, but I always find some real-world examples can be helpful to see what this looks like in practice. So we'll go through a few of those now, and I'll note that these examples are just excerpts from actual reports, so they only present a piece of a much bigger picture, and they're examples of current practice, and we're not passing judgment on them as to whether they're good or bad practices. First, let's look at this governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel Africa, a Nigerian telecommunications company. In line with the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards, they reported the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability-related performance. Here, Airtel noted that the non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy include gender diversity. Within their governance report, they also went into further detail on the specific initiatives and actions overseen by the board and its committees in the reporting year. For example, the role of the nominations committee in reviewing executive remuneration. They also note that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, a strong incentive to take this seriously. The next example is on strategy. Strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Here we can see the sustainability report of Astra International, an Indonesian conglomerate. Astra International outlines the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, this statement is then backed up by a roadmap and other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a gender diverse workforce. Alongside this, Astra also goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through different programs to make the workplace more suitable for women and through their Women Leaders Development Program. And then they also have a Women's Network program for the wider workforce. Interestingly, I want to point out that they say that human capital development covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carry out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain their relevancy in the era of disruptions. In other words, Astra stated that a more diverse and gender equal business can help to maintain the company's relevancy in an era of disruptions. So I think this is an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. Next, I want to share an example on risk management disclosures. And for this, we'll take a look at L'Oréal, the French cosmetics company's annual report, which was prepared in alignment with the ESRS. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report to understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. L'Oreal provided an overview of how they go about identifying material impacts, risks, and opportunities, and they were using a double materiality lens, which includes the financial or investor materiality perspective of the ISSB. You can see here in the disclosure, they explain the process they have used to identify and assess the material topics, including specific issues relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including the stakeholder groups consulted as part of the process. For each material subtopic related to DE&I, they identify the policies and action plans in place to manage that risk or impact area. The fourth and final example I want to share with you today is a disclosure example on reporting gender-related metrics and targets used by Cemex, a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex stated in its annual report that it's a signatory to the UN WEPs, as well as the UN Global Compact's target gender equality, and they're also EDGE certified. In this example, we can see Cemex updating on the progress made towards gender equality in its workforce. I'll note that Cemex is in an industry that is traditionally male-dominated, so therefore they might be starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from another more or less male-dominated industry. This example shows that any business can take action towards gender equality, though, even in traditionally male-dominated industries. Here we see that Cemex set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions. So they specify the base year, which was, I believe, 2022. They set a target of 30% and the target year of 2030. And later on in the report, they also report different metrics, such as the percentage of workforce by gender, the percentage of female employees by position, and women to men remuneration by each region. Something we've discussed a lot in our sessions together is sex disaggregated data and metrics. And these are, of course, sex disaggregated metrics, which helps Cemex and their stakeholders better understand the progress towards their overall long-term goal to increase women's representation in line with that 2030 target that they set. Now, on this topic of metrics and disclosures, we recently released a follow-up report, and that provides the first comprehensive comparative assessment of gender-related disclosure metrics issued by stock exchanges and standard setters worldwide. This SSE Market Monitor provides an analysis of the gender equality disclosure metrics recommended by stock exchanges and corporate reporting standard setters like ISSB and GRI, among others. This analysis includes a benchmark of those metrics against the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, the WEPs, and then we saw that the resulting data reveals some gaps in subject matter coverage compared to the WEPs and some inconsistencies in the metrics recommended. The report goes on to provide recommendations for improvements to the quality and scope of gender equality metrics based on roundtable discussions with standard setters and other institutions. So I recommend taking a couple minutes and checking that report out. In addition to the standards we just discussed, there are also additional organizations that you can look for more guidance on these topics. So there's the guiding principles for you to consider, such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we've talked a lot about them, and SDG 5, as well as, of course, the WEPs, which we've discussed just a bit ago. In addition, it's always important to know what disclosures are required of your organization by law. And beyond this, there's a number of rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as those of the World Benchmarking Alliance. Then there's also a number of indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance companies, for example, Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, among others. Finally, there's management standards that your organization may wish to adopt, which can help enhance your organization's performance on gender. Here we can look, for example, at the ISO 26000, guidance on social responsibility, and gender equality is also present in many other ISO standards. There's also the SDG impact standards, which are management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into the decision-making approach. So hopefully this provides a pretty comprehensive overview of some of the disclosure guidelines and standards you can consider, as well as considering the disclosure standards. We previously also talked about standards and certifications that can be used to develop your organization's gender equality practices and internal processes. These are referred to as performance management standards and can help guide industry practices. One such set of standards that's highly relevant for gender equality is the EDGE certification, which we did touch on in our session last week. And with that, we're very happy to have with us the Managing Director, David Pritchett of EDGE Certified Foundation, and he's going to share a little bit more about EDGE certification and taking that additional step further on gender certification. So I'll turn it over to you now, David.
Unmute myself. Thanks a lot, Landon, for the very exhaustive presentation on some of the disclosure standards and the ratings and the performance standards, etc. It's a very complex world out there of different frameworks, guidelines, standards, and regulations that I know everybody is navigating. And it's important to look at your own jurisdiction for the ones which are taking the priority. But what I wanted to introduce today a little bit was a type of certification which looks very much at the performance management element of gender equality in the workplace. It's a solution which underpins a lot of the compliance type frameworks, where it facilitates compliance with some of these or all of these reporting metrics, but at the same time, it dives very deeply into your own organizational structure to really understand the underlying factors which drive a specific dynamic in your gender equality makeup of your workforce and how that is impacting your talent management strategy and the career pipelines of men and women in the workplace and how they are actually perceived to thrive in the workplace. So I'll just take about 10 minutes and just share with you some thoughts about how you might want to, if you really want to go deeper into your organization, to look at some of the levers and the drivers of an effective talent management strategy from a gender equality basis. So that's really the focus here, and I'm happy to take questions. I'll go through it quite quickly. Just a quick introduction to EDGE. Some of you may have heard of it. It's an independent third-party system. It's one of those voluntary sustainability standards systems, which has an impartiality, independence factor built into it with a certification. I work in the EDGE Foundation, which sets the methodology, the standards, and the guidelines for certification. Organizations that wish to be certified work with EDGE strategy and use the software to manage their talent management data, and then organizations get certified through independent certification. So it's independently audited. The certification is awarded by one of three different certification bodies, which operate on an international basis. This is a global scheme working in 77 countries and across different sectors, with now up to 1,000 organizations having been certified. But what are the global standards? The global standards are both gender binary, so looking at the talent journeys, if you like, of women and men in organizations. But we also look at gender in intersection with other dimensions of diversity, because we feel and we've seen and we have evidence for that the fact that there are often obstacles in the workplace for often women in intersection with other elements of diversity, and it's possible for organizations to analyze some of the drivers and some of the obstacles and some of the perceptions which may be impeding the organization's optimal strategies by assessing gender and intersection with other elements of diversity. And how do we do that? So let me just talk a little bit about how the assessment works. There's 4 pillars. There's a quantitative part and a qualitative part. There are some core metrics on representation which align to all of the different frameworks that you've seen, the GRI frameworks or the UN Women Economics Empowerment Principles, and some of the other ones that Landon talked about. We have representation a little bit more deeper from our sides. We go into different levels of responsibility. We go into different job types. We go into different roles and functions within an organization. We look at representation through the lens of top talent and performance management and mentoring and sponsorship and things like that. So we really look at the representation and the gender balance across many of the different value drivers of gender equality in the workplace. We explore pay equity. I'm sure we've talked about pay equity a lot. It's a highly fast developing regulatory area, especially in the EU, which is going to impact a lot of the other countries working in this space, where specific directives are now coming into play around pay equity. So we assess pay equity from both an average perspective as well as an unexplained or an adjusted basis. So running a regression analysis using quite sophisticated tools to really analyze the pay gap, factoring in a lot of the variables which can generally explain a pay gap. If you factor those into the equation, then you can actually look at the unexplained or the adjusted pay gap. What we're looking on the qualitative side of things is the effectiveness of policies, practices, and the culture. We do this through assessing the maturity of policies and practices in different areas. So we look at recruitment and promotion, flexible working, professional development and training, organizational culture and pay equity, for example, some of those core focus areas in our policies and practices, and how deep and effective the policies are actually being implemented. And we assess also the inclusiveness of the culture. So we want to understand the perceptions of the employees and the experiences of the employees in how they are feeling in terms of the inclusiveness in the culture of the organization. And we do that triangulating the data. So if you like, we collect data on certain indicators, we assess the policies, practices on the same kinds of areas which underpin those indicators, and then we assess the employee experiences in exactly the same areas. So we're able to triangulate and see where there might be specific gaps, which may be underlying factors that an organization need to work on to optimize their gender equality strategy in the workplace. So that's a little bit how it works. It's a performance standard, as Landon mentioned, so there's different levels of certification depending on how mature and how well you perform against the EDGE indicators. There's 4 different levels, and these start with EDGE Assess, which there's no barriers to entry here. So an organization that commits to assessing using the EDGE standards will achieve one or other of these standards. EDGE Assess will be the first level that an organization reaches by purely undertaking the assessment. Once an organization reaches the thresholds that we set for different performance measures, they can move up in the scheme to go up to EDGE Lead. EDGE Plus means that they've assessed gender and intersection with another element of diversity in their organization. I thought I would just share with you a couple of examples. As Landon said, it's quite good to sort of talk to the standards through the lens of a couple of example organizations who've been through this and what results did they find. This example is an energy organization who worked with us over the period of 4 years. So they did 3 certification cycles, one in 2020, one in 2022, and one in 2024. A very male-dominated industry at the start. This graph here, which is very difficult to see, but it shows the percentage of representation at the 4 different levels of management in the organization. You see that the organization was highly challenged to reach anything above 20 to 25% at junior management, and even 10% at the upper management. And the organization wanted to see these numbers increase, ideally, and wanted to put in place some strategies to, over the long term, to try to see those numbers increase, which is what they were able to achieve 6 years or 4 years later over 3 different cycles. And the underlying assessment, obviously, there's never one core element which is the solution to this kind of issue, and it's definitely not to recruit women directly into these top management or upper management roles, which a lot of companies do, which is simply to parachute certain profiles into specific positions, but to work much more sustainably on the talent pipeline, on the retention elements of women in the workplace, on recruiting the right candidates at the start, and helping them through very tailored mechanisms to work through the organizations and to grow into management roles. So we worked with the organization on recruitment and promotion policies and practices, some performance management measures, making sure that they were all de-biased, ungendered, there was fairness playing out through their whole mentoring and sponsorship and professional development and training and recruitment and promotion. And this was very transparent and accountable towards all employees. So the employees felt themselves that they had an equal chance of promotion throughout and career advancement throughout the organization. And this quickly turned into better retention of women in the workplace, and of course the optimal solution, which was equal promotions, which led to a larger percentage overall in the workplace of women in the different management levels, which was well perceived by the leadership. Second example, the finance industry. The finance industry struggled at this organization. This was over 2 certification cycles. In the first assessment, they struggled a little bit in the maturity of their policies and practices. The organization in question felt that they had good policies and practices, but what they weren't aware, they had good policies, but these policies were not well implemented. They didn't have the programs and the processes and the systems which were supporting the implementation of those policies, especially in recruitment and promotion and leadership development training. And above all, they were not run in a very fair way in the workplace. They were very focused on, they were driving a very male-dominated culture, especially in profit and loss-facing roles in the financial services industry, which is still very prevalent to this day. But what they were able to do was really focus on the maturity of implementation of those policies and how they were going to implement those and how they were going to be accountable to the employees about implementing those policies. So we ran a questionnaire of 31 questions and tested their maturity across these 5 areas. And the organization was able to put in place better and biased practices in place to enforce a more effective implementation of their policies and practices. And they saw the results 2 years later. So that's just another example, but there's a lot of different organizations we work with. They could be public sector, private sector, international finance institutions such as the IFC, who you've heard on this webinar, and very supportive of this program. They themselves get certified. They also certify their portfolio organizations. So many of you may be working with the IFC directly in some capacity building programs in gender equality, and they are working also especially in the African continent in helping with gender certification through the EDGE system. The World Bank and many UN agencies are also certified, but we also see some large multinationals in there. So it's very much a global standard. It's a one size fits all, and each organization will find their way with different pathways, if you like, to actually understand how their talent management pipelines and career progression can go. And this underpins, as I said, and facilitates the compliance to all of the global standards and frameworks that you've heard about today. Stop there. We don't have too much long, and you might have some questions.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, David, for that great overview. We have had one question that's in the chat from Matebe, who says, I want to know if you're looking at growth within the organization. So they've said, for example, the rate at which women are getting promoted, especially into higher leadership positions. So I guess not just the fact of if they're being promoted, but actually how quickly is that progression happening, which is an interesting point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and an equally important point is to look at the proportionate amount of recruitment and promotion in an organization. A lot of organizations look at pure numbers, and then they will see that if they have less women in the workplace, the numbers being promoted are obviously less than men being promoted, and then they can draw conclusions from that. But it's very important to look at proportionately how many people are promoted each year through the pipeline at each different level, and that will depend obviously on the growth of the organization, depending on how many promotion opportunities there may be in an organization. But it's really important to look at that proportionality perspective, because that helps to keep a certain proportion of women at different levels of management throughout the pipeline, not just at the lower levels, but also going up through to the upper levels.
Lovely. Thanks for explaining that further. That's really useful. So I don't see any other questions. And as you say, I know we've only got a few minutes left, so we can close that segment there. But big thank you again, David, for joining us and for taking the time to talk us through that. Fantastic. Okay, great. So as we're wrapping up the session, we just have one final trip back to Menti to see how we're doing now against those learning objectives that we set ourselves at the start. Maybe just reflect for a brief moment on what our key takeaways are. So I'll just reshare my screen. And you should have the link to Menti already, but maybe we can just share that again in the chat. But you can areas that we started off the session with, and maybe just take a moment to rate how you're feeling now about your current level of comfort and understanding on these different areas. So I can see we've only had 2 responses so far, but both looking very positive, so that's a good start. Great to see those 2 individuals feeling more comfortable, but if a few more of you want to let us know what you're thinking, that would be great. It's always helpful for us just to get a sense of how well we're doing with this training and any areas where we can continue to work on making sure we're helping you achieve that impact. We'll be giving you feedback survey at the end of the session as well, where you let us know comments in particular you might have on that front. But I can see it's evening out a little bit now. I've had a few more responses, but overly on our perspectives sessions. Sorry. And my question on the very ground. There's a lot of organization. So maybe just take a moment to think about from our program. If one key takeaway to learn, maybe something about that you find relevant, learn more about. Be great, just take in that and commitment about forward as we will about bonds and gentle and that fun. You're understanding. That's great to see. Okay, wait and see if we get maybe what it is, and then see application. So accountability, intentionality, great, really, really good concepts. It seems like lots of different things. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I saw a comment about the sound. Let me know in the chat if there is a sound problem. But great, thanks everyone for sharing. So let me go back to the presentation, and we just have a final few slides to wrap up and cover off a few key. Okay. Zoom seems to be a little bit slow at the moment. Sorry, everyone. I think I might be having a little bit of a computer glitch. Well, I'll just keep going whilst the slides are hopefully catching up with me. But just in the presentation, we've got a few slides in the handout which give you, I think maybe my internet connection is going slightly, like it's too bad, please step in.
Yeah, I'm going to hop in. I wasn't sure if it was just my internet connection or Fiona's, but I think a few more folks are saying
Go
the
ahead.
sound is breaking up. So just as we wrap up here, we want to share, for example, to some resources you can use. We have a lot of resources you can use actually to continue your learning journey ordered by units we've gone through. And I also want to remind everyone that you can download the handouts, which contain many resources and links to what we've discussed for further information. I also encourage you to stay tuned into SSE training by subscribing to our newsletter for more relevant training sessions. All these resources, including our partner and guest speaker slides, can be found on the SSE website. And we'll also post the recordings from part one and part two on the website as well if you want to watch them again or refer to them later. There's also a great resource on IFC Beyond the Balance Sheet, and it collates a broader set of resources related to sustainability, governance, and disclosure. And of course, perhaps something you've all been waiting for about a certificate. We're very grateful for any feedback you have on the training, and as a part of our appreciation, we'll be sending out certificates of participation from the SSE, IFC, UN Women, and Columbia University for all of those who complete the feedback survey. You can access the feedback survey through the link that I will share now in the chat. Sorry, just trying to do dual duty here because I'm not sure. Oh, Fiona shared it. Thank you. So that's great. Yeah, as I said, you can access the survey through the
Very
link
slowly
in the
from my.
chat box. And then also, we'll send an automatic email 24 hours after this to everyone who participated in both sessions. And that will include the link to complete the survey too. Please allow up to 5 working days for the certificate. A big thank you to our guest speakers, Guillaume Jacques from Luxy, and our guest speaker from Edge, David Pritchett. And I want to thank our partners quickly, the IRC, UN Women, especially Alexandra, for joining us today, Columbia University, Government of Luxembourg, as well. A big, big thank you to JSE for hosting this training. In closing, thank you again for your time and participation. We hope you learned a thing or two from our time together, and we hope to have you join a future training webinar and session, and we will see you again. Take care, everyone.